Hang on.
And I would appreciate it if you guys kept up the standard of professionalism that this show is known for.
That's appropriate, John, because I was just beginning Eaters of the Dead today, so I'm glad you.
I thought if I'm on with Laird, I've got to bring my A game. You know.
What the hell is that?
You've got your COVID hair. I've got my Viking hat.
You know what? COVID, honestly, 2 hours ago, I thought, I can't do this. But then I thought, I've had to cancel twice in a row. I can't cancel again. Especially because John's not a panelist. He's a guest. So, you know.
Oh, no, that would be all the more reason to cancel.
Oh, and Laird's here, too. So, Laird's pretty popular.
I know. Everybody's like, don't cancel Laird.
Yeah, so anyway, welcome to the Lovecraft Easing podcast, folks. Thanks for watching. As always, we'll have the audio edition up probably in about a week. I've been a bit behind lately, but we'll get it up for those of you who like to listen on the go. And for those of you who like to watch our faces, and I think John just told me I look like Sam Elliott. Was that you?
No, that was Laird. I think
that
was Laird.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But I'll take that.
He said it with love.
Said with affection. All right. So these guys, Laird Barron and John Langan, they have new books out. They have a plethora of books behind those. If you haven't read them all, you should. And let's do introductions, and then let's talk to these guys. And my thought was, all kidding aside, I truly am not feeling well at all. I'm recovering from COVID, and I've got shingles and just on and on. That's not to complain, but it occurred to me that you guys have a friendship that's stretching back years, you know, and your writing journeys have, it seems to me, paralleled each other in different and similar ways. So I thought you guys might sort of interview each other, if that makes sense. And you already agreed to it in an email, so you can't back out now. So all right, let's I'm Mike Davis, Lovecraft Easing. Ben, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Ben Handelman. I provide tech support to Mike, especially in these trying times of that haircut. So
yeah,
necessary.
I'm keeping my brain warm. Matt. And I think it looks like you have a prize as usual.
Yes, I'm Matt Carpenter. I'm running the Easing Movie Night. And for those of you who haven't seen it, this coming Saturday, next week, we're going to show episodes 1 and 2 of Lovecraft Country. So if you don't have HBO, this will be your chance. So it'll be 8:30 p.m. Central Time on Saturday next week.
I'd like to add to that before you do the prize. The Saturday night movie night, I used to do it, and you took over for me. First of all, I really appreciate that. But it's
the people were crying for change. Don't worry about it.
All right, it's been nice talking to you guys. Anyway, we used to use another program. Now we're using Cast. Thanks to a friend, told me about a site called Linktree, which I subscribe to, very cheap. And if you go to the show notes here, you'll see something that says all links underneath the first paragraph. And somewhere on that page, I mean, I've got every link: Twitter, Facebook, blah, 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 you know, whatever. Buy Lovecraft Easing books. And I also have a link to the Cast Lovecraft Easing movie Cast page, whatever you want to call it. So it's easy to find, and get on there and ask Matt for an invite, or ask to accept you, and he gets to it within a few days usually. So what's your prize?
Okay, this is very interesting. This was a few years ago. They had a Kickstarter. This guy named Ezra Claveri. It's The Shadow Out of Providence. It is what's called a meta text. It was a screenplay and a couple essays dealing with how Lovecraft has impacted popular culture. It's got lots of interesting art. It's a very unique book, all kinds of photographs and things like that. So what you do is go to easingprizes@gmail.com, send us an email, put Shadow in the subject heading, and you'll be entered into this drawing in a few weeks.
Yeah, you know, speaking of the Lovecraft Country. I was going to do the smart thing this time and wait till all the episodes were out and then watch the show, because I'm poor. But then I realized I couldn't do that because Matt Ruff is going to be on the show next Sunday, and the writer of the book. And I thought, well, I better have at least 2 episodes, in addition to having read the book. I better have at least 2 episodes in. I don't know really what I was expecting. I had heard good things, but my expectations were okay, this is going to be, I think pretty good, watchable, I have to say it blew me away utterly and completely. So anyone who has any reservations about watching this, and granted I've only seen the first one, but I really can't get into how much I loved it without spoilers. So I love it. So Rich Bunting.
Hey, I'm Rich. I don't do tech support. I guess I support the e-zine in other ways, and I'm a fanboy, and I'm here to make fun of Ben.
Ben, do you have to reference my hair on the live chat too?
Yes, I do. Look. What if someone has the stream paused when Laird Barron is on the screen and they can't see your hair very well? I need to make sure it's clear for them so that they know what's happening.
Yeah, well, my hair is more popular than I am. So, Laird Barron, one of the guests on today's show, would you introduce yourself for the one person out there who doesn't know who you are?
Hey guys, thanks for having me back. Laird
Always.
Barron. I write crime, horror, noir. The kind of the dark end of the spectrum. Short fiction and novels, and just glad to be back chatting with you guys again.
And John Langan, who recently became a regular panelist on the show and now can't back out, but today he's a guest. So, want to introduce yourself, John? Yeah. Well, I should say Laird's latest book is Worse Angels, the third of the Coleridge series, and we'll get into that in a bit. And your latest book, John, is Children of the Fang. So, yeah.
Yeah, just out 5 days ago, August 18th. Yeah, I'm John Langan. I'm usually the person that people are asking, do you know where Laird is? And you're here. Is Laird here? Did he come with you? And
that must be such an ego boost for you.
Oh, it is. It is. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Actually, no, I'll tell you right now. When I was the guest of honor at Nikon last year, I got there, and a number of people said to me, "You're here, John. Is Laird here? Is he the guest of honor?" And I was like, "Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot." Anyway. So yeah, John Langan. Here I am. I come from the land of the ice and snow.
Actually, for me, it was the opposite. When I was doing Autumn Cthulhu, that was when I learned that you get John Langan submissions late. I learned this the hard way, and I sent an email to Laird and said something to the effect of, "Can you motivate your friend here?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'll kick him in the seat of the pants." And so a couple weeks later, I got it. So, and I was glad because it was great. So yeah.
I don't want to tell you what he did to me.
But I told you not to worry; it'd be worth it.
Yes, that's right. You did. Before I go on, I want to mention 3 books behind me that I got in the mail. First of all, The Fog, John Carpenter's 1980 movie. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it is one of my favorite movies.
Yep.
And someone said, last week on Facebook that when they were watching The Fog, it seemed to them like it was it felt like Dennis Hutchinson. And then, to their surprise, they found out that there was a novelization of the movie by Dennis Hutchinson, which, is one of those things in life that's just really cool. And I've only had time to read the prologue, the Mackin first scene where Mackin's telling the story to the kids around the campfire, and it already adds so much to it. So I'm not usually a fan of novelizations, but this is just really great so far. The other thing I want to point out is Night of the Mannequins, Stephen Graham Jones. I think this is coming up on. You can pre-order it now. I think it's available September 1st. So, you guys have heard of this guy, right? You like his work? Both of you guys? Okay.
He's all right.
Yeah, he's okay. I mean, he's no Langan, but. And then Scott Nickley sent me this. He translated a Jean Rene Cruise of Shadows. Jean Ray, excuse me. I don't pretend to be an expert on Jean Ray, if I'm even saying that right. But he is. And I started into this, and I was just shocked how much I loved it. It's just totally and completely, it's just very good weird fiction. So you can buy all three of those online. The Fog might be getting harder and harder to find, but it's out there. So I guess we have to talk about you guys' work, because Laird doesn't want to talk about superhero films. I found out today. So.
Laird's always up to talk about superhero films. Ask him about Man of Steel and just let him go.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with superhero films at all.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
I have a problem with people who have a problem with them.
Oh,
they don't
we're on the same side.
Yeah.
No, you're not. Just wait.
Well, probably not, right? But I still like them in principle.
Well, I got to say this, and this is probably the most important moment in this entire show. In the upcoming movie, The Flash, my two favorite Batmen, Michael Keaton and Ben Affleck, are both going to be Batman in this movie. You know, introducing more of the multiverse. How cool is that, right,
I think
John?
it's great.
Yeah.
Keaton was the best Batman, and I approve of Affleck. They just haven't really given him enough to work with, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I actually think, poor Pattinson, he gets such a bad, a raw deal because he was in Twilight. The guy is a brilliant actor.
Yeah,
I liked I'm not a big fan of The Lost City of Z. I saw parts of that. That wasn't really my thing, but it wasn't his fault. Everything I've watched him in, he has done it.
Well, Laird, did you see the Batman, the Batman trailer that dropped yesterday?
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
And I'm a bit cynical about the movies because I think that a lot of them don't take chances. Things, you're going to get what you get, and I'm sure that I don't want to get hyped for this too much, but he's going to do well. I was sold, and I do like the fact that people are noticing that it reminds them of the parallels to The Crow, which I think it's proper homage just from what I saw in the previews, as opposed to copying anything or regurgitating. It looks like it's just a little nod to one of the best superhero movies we've had, which is The Crow is enduring. I never read the comic. People were talking about the comic. Oh. I made a little joke yesterday because the first thing I noticed when I watched the movie back, when it came out, he has a crow, but his name's Raven. That's quite, or Draven, Da Raven. I always thought that was that a little in joke, or did they just not pay attention to the name that they gave him? And but I love all that, and I like how the new Batman kind of has some of that dark aesthetic, kind of punk aesthetic. Somebody said, and I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know the story, but I've heard a rumor that it's going to be based loosely on The Long Halloween, and whether that's true or not, yes, I agree. I'm really sold on this.
Yeah.
And the Matt Reeves, I forget which two movies he mentioned, but yeah, Laird, you and I have talked about the mood, the aesthetic of the 70s sometimes in fiction. Mm-hmm. And he actually mentioned a couple 70s movies that he's partly inspired by doing the Batman. So,
well,
yeah.
When did The Fog come out? Isn't that like 80 or 79?
1980.
Yeah, just one, because you guys, you brought it up. I have to say, not style-wise, but I watched The Fog a few years after it came out, probably mid-80s, because we were living in the woods at the time, and so it could be several years. Like, I didn't watch The Thing when it first came out. It was like 3 or 4 years later, VHS.
Right.
But Carpenter's movies, The Thing and The Fog, also, especially that opening scene where the fog's rolling in and the aesthetics of the quick stop or the quickie mart and the things start rattling. I internalized a lot of that for my own writing, not to use that specific imagery, but the idea that how powerful imagery can be. There's no dialogue. I mean, it's incidental dialogue. It's all just setting up the mood. And a lot of movies from the 70s do that. And he carried that over into the 80s where, these introductions didn't have to be like massive action set pieces. It could be, but there was just long tracking shots. There was a lot of, whether it was through action or through the suggestion that action was impending, he really did let the atmosphere of the urban or rural environment or wilderness environment sort of carry the dialogue. And I don't see as much of that these days, except maybe in independent or foreign films. And so it's something that I hold close to my heart, actually.
Midnight Till One belongs to the dead. I love that from there. And I was sold from the first moment when his music, especially at the beginning there, that piano music is great. And then he's quoting Poe. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to like this movie. Ben, did you have something to say? And you're moderating the chat for me, right?
The trailer for the Batman looks great, and I think Pattinson is in the same position that Leonardo DiCaprio was in the late 2000s, where he had to sort of live down all the romantic drama films and Titanic and stuff, going into things like Inception or Shutter Island. And so I think Pattinson is going to be in that same position where you give him a movie like this to really shine, not just like the more esoteric stuff like The Lighthouse, but something like this will really change how people see him. I did want to comment on The Crow. So the graphic novel is pretty dark and pretty amazing. The author, James O'Barr, his fiance was killed by a drunk driver. And so he just sort of had all this sort of anger and despair that he just sort of pours out onto the page. And the movie does a great job of sort of like taking some elements of it and making a film. But I would honestly say they're almost like two different things inspired by the same source, if that makes sense. And it's really worth reading to check out.
No, that sells me on trying it.
And it's full of Joy Division songs. I just have to point
out that it's easy to forget, but a lot of people had the same feeling when Keaton was cast as Batman. They were like, Mr. Mom's going to be Batman. Come on, But then he did awesome. A lot of people railed about Affleck, and Affleck did awesome. So anyway, let's see here. Oh yeah, the last thing when it comes to superhero movies, I really think Laird's pranking me here, but how he wrote today on Twitter, we're going to talk about how Jesus is a great superhero origin story.
Yeah. I'm not joking.
Okay.
And you can, if you want a dissertation, I'll go ahead and write one, and get it to you in a few weeks, but just off the cuff observation. I actually I write poetry sometimes in a line. It was a couple days ago. So this is just sort of all, I don't know, just sort of synchronicity maybe. But I wrote the first couple lines to a poem, and it was talking about the origin stories of superheroes like Musashi and Goliath, or supervillain in his case. But no, just off the cuff, it would be what is Superman, but not Jesus' story told,
right.
In a comic book. A father, in his case his parents, but his father, sends this being to Earth to basically be a moral and, in Superman's case, a physical force, but this force for good, supernatural elements. And of course, in Jesus's case, there's a whole, you've got the first part of the story where he's just, going around and preaching and kind of rousing the rabble and kind of setting the stage. But then later on, there's the kind of the mysterious second act after he's risen, where he kind of ascends into his own. And then, and then of course the end of it is he's leave. You know, he's in the wilderness for a bit, and then he leaves Earth, but he's still with us at all times. And I find that to be, you know, the easy parallel is the Superman story. I mean, it's almost, I won't say blow for blow, but it's a pretty strong parallel there. And I have to think that the creators of that comic must have had that. I've never read much about why they did what they did. I know it's an immigrant story, that kind of thing, and maybe that wasn't consciously in their thoughts. But one thing I know as a writer, it's why I take credit for things that I didn't intentionally plan and accept the blame for things I didn't intentionally plan, is that we are 99% subconscious. You are what you eat. You are what you absorb. And I said a long time ago, I always list my inspirations, and I used to leave off Edgar Allan Poe because it just was it's forest for the trees, right? I grew up reading Poe. He's one of the very first horror authors I ever read. I was reading him when I was, you know, in grade school. But I never gave him real credit until one day I was looking at my writing and went, wow, I got awful lot of live burial and degenerating sanity, you know, a lot of gothic elements. And you know, they didn't come out of a spring from a vacuum. Those are, you know, Poe is one of the people who is to blame for that kind of stuff. And so I do think that whether they consciously were telling sort of a retelling of the story of Jesus or a parallel to it, that's what it is. And we can kind of do that with a lot of mythological, whether it's religious or mythological figures. I mean, the MCU has, I'm trying to remember who has Hercules, but you have Hercules, you've got Thor. I mean, those guys all jumped on the fact that, you know, demigods, gods, superheroes are sort of synonymous, immortals. You're talking, you know, in my mind, you know, when I think about writing the Coleridge series, I'm always thinking about the original, who I consider to be some of the original superheroes, and that would be Achilles and Odysseus and Gilgamesh, and, you know, like I said, people from religious, you know, text like Goliath and David, and you know, yeah,
Davy and Goliath.
Hey, David.
Davy and Goliath.
That was the TV show David and Goliath. Remember
That's right.
It was Davy and Goliath. I'm pretty sure, right?
So there you go. Right.
You know,
That's
I don't
right.
think a lot of people remember this.
It wasn't blasphemous.
It was always on at like 6 a.m. It was the very first thing on Saturday that you'd see.
Right, it was redeeming. It was
subverting the kids before their angry pastor parent got up. You know,
was it Robot Chicken did a parody of that where Davy comes in and he's, you know, become a sort of fundamentalist, and Goliath is like, oh, Davy, I don't know, and so he murders him basically.
Yeah,
like,
I know. Mad TV.
God.
Gosh, this is 20 years ago.
Terminator.
Mad TV did Davy, Son of Sam. Davy and Goliath was Son of Sam.
You know, just briefly back to Superman, guys, and Laird. A lot of people probably don't remember this, but one of the very, very, very first trailers for the 1978 Superman was this voiceover that said, once there was a great civilization, and talks about, wish I could remember the exact phrase, but he said, with greater intelligence and a greater capacity for good. And then it goes on, because of the wisdom of Jor-El, he sent his only son. And then, of course, you know, in the very last words in the Fortress of Solitude, before Superman flies for the first time in the movie, you know, Jor-El says, they can be a great people they wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. For this reason, above all, I have sent in you my only son. I mean, yeah, that's got Jesus all over it.
Well, keep in mind, too, that Siegel and Schuster, who were Jewish, choose that name El. Jor-El, Kal-El, and El goes back to Elohim. You know, it's an old an old word for God or the divine or something like that. And that association of Superman with the sun. Grant Morrison has come back around and made that argument recently that Superman is basically like a sun god.
Yeah,
you know, there's no limit to how powerful Superman is. Really, we every now and again, you know, he's usually like trying to be nice, but every now and again, we're reminded in some comic book or cartoon or another that most of the time he's holding back like 99% of his power, and it's only when he goes up against like Darkseid or something that he's able to really unleash. And even then, he really isn't unleashing because he still doesn't want to kill Darkseid. So that I agree. He is like our kind of solar god kind of.
He's like an Apollo. I think Grant Morrison's book, right?
Yeah.
As a sun god, it makes me more think of him more as an Apollo, but with the Jewish origin, being that Siegel was a Jew, and creating this, and with Jor-El and Kal-El, yes, I think that El is explicitly associated with kind of this Old Testament.
I want to get to Laird and John, but the last thing I'll say about Superman is
you're going to kill Matt Carpenter. Come on, man.
Yes, I know. Matt's like, oh my God, I'm done with this show. Both.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't kill Matt Carpenter. I just want to,
have a good reason for it.
Not before he gives the prize.
Exactly.
Oh, well, that's true. Okay, all right.
Or does movie night. No, both in Man of Steel and in Superman Returns. In Superman Returns, when Brandon Routh's Superman pushes the kryptonite, basic island out of the way and passes out and falls, his arms are out like in a cross. That's very deliberate. And when Henry Cavill's Superman leaves the alien ship, Zod's ship, he has the same stance, right before he flies and rescues Lois from the defective the pod that was going to send her to Earth.
Doesn't he have the same position in Batman versus Superman when he
when the
after the nuke goes off? It's
so to be clear, they like Richard Donner specifically said like Superman is like Jesus, like he specifically was aiming for Christ-like imagery throughout the two films he did. Bryan Singer was specifically continuing that because he's such a fan of those two films.
In your favorite
and then
show,
clearly Zack Snyder was going for the same look.
In your favorite Superman show, Lois and Clark, Ben,
says the guy who was cheering for nerd Superman in Christ on Infinite Earths. Just saying. Don't
even get me started on Tyler Harknan or whatever his name is. You said that Lois said to Superman, "You live above us, and every time we try to drag you down to our level, we just show the worst of ourselves." So, anyway, okay, we're done with Superman. We should probably talk to Laird and John because that's what the audience is looking for.
Oh, all right.
So you guys,
it's a serious conversation.
Oh, you're taking off the helmet?
Don't take the horns off, John.
If we go back to comics, the horns will come back on. That's
Oh, okay. The comments are: Greg Green says we got Jesus, Superman, and Edgar Allan Poe in this conversation so far. This is awesome. I feel vindicated. Okay, all right. All right, you guys are friends, and
let's not go crazy.
Friendly sometimes. You guys both have very different backgrounds, and I'd like maybe for you guys to talk with each other for the benefit of us and for the audience of, maybe starting off with your different backgrounds. Why did you choose to write, and then your writing journey? How did you guys meet? And more than that, when you guys met, and whatever else you guys want to throw in. I'm just throwing in some ideas here. You don't have to follow this script. But so you guys meet, and then what was it that gelled that you guys, I feel a bond with this, subconsciously I feel a bond with this guy. He's becoming more and more of a friend, that sort of thing. So I don't know. How do you guys want to start this?
I'll let Laird start.
Cop out.
Just to jump forward for a second, one of the reasons we bonded is because nobody else liked us.
Yeah, that's true. I
remember one time I was sitting at a table with Mark Laidlaw and Michael Shea, and I can't remember. It might have been at the Nebulas. It was in Seattle, so it probably was the Nebula, something like that. And I remember Greg Bear, a very famous science fiction author. he came over and says, this is where the horror guys are. You know, all three of you at the convention, because all the horror guys that are here, you know, like clumped in one little corner far away from everyone else. And so I kind of think that was, yeah.
Got to keep the riffraff away from everyone else.
Exactly. John and I were riffraff, and, you know, over time, you know, we more riffraff. You know, we found other riff to raff with, but that's probably why we bonded. But no, we both appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction around the same time, back in 2001, I believe it was. And I think John had On Skua Island come out a couple issues before my debut story, if I'm.
It was the issue before. I want to say I was August and you were September, or I was July and you were August, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the Kate Wilhelm issue, so it's like Kate Wilhelm, nobody else in this issue, but you know, as appropriate. But we liked each other's stories. I really thought, you know, we were and also I had been reading quite a bit of the magazine prior to appearing in it. And then later on, I noticed there were very few, you know, horror writers. It's not that they never published horror, because they obviously do, but that was definitely the exception. Dale Bailey, you know, would publish in there, and obviously they had published Stephen King and Bradbury, and you know, plenty of great. I'm sure Edginson had been in there. I mean, they had done their thing with horror over the years, but it's still, you know, if there's 10 or 11 stories in an issue, you're going to have a horror story or two horror stories, if maybe. You're talking like half a dozen stories a year type of thing. And so John and I were the horror writers, and for a very, you know, for a very short period of time. It was like about a 3 or 4 year stretch there where we were, you know, I was in there half a dozen, you know, 5 or 6 times. John was in there 7 or 8 times. And I don't know. But I also liked his work. He and Dale Bailey were a couple of people. Jeffrey Ford had a couple of spooky things in there. And, you know, I was trying to basically hone my skills as a horror writer. And so I was paying attention to what my comrades in that particular subgenre were doing. And then John and I just hit it off. We started corresponding over the next few years. And then I started attending some East Coast conventions in about the time that my first collection came out, the Amigo sequence came out. You know, at that point, I had a reason to be doing a little more traveling away from the West Coast. And so I went to ReaderCon, and I went to World Fantasy and stuff like that. And John and I hung out along with Paul Tremblay, Stephen Graham Jones, you know, and those were some of the first friends that I made. As well, you know, that were colleagues in the field. And then just over the years, we became really, really good friends. We have a lot in common. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about John and Stephen Graham Jones and Paul Tremblay, just to name a couple others, is that we're all hardcore horror writers, and we all have similarities, and yet none of us, and I think we're influenced to some degree by each other. We've you know, I've done my Stephen Graham Jones type of story and featured him in stories, and I've done my John Langan stories, and John picks on Paul like incessantly, and of course Paul's written stories about both of us, but we're all completely different. We all have a completely different take on horror, and I think it's one of those sort of cliches that it's a cliche because it's true. Sometimes not to say opposite, but sometimes it's the differences that forge that's like the bedrock of the bond, is that, yeah, we're in the same struggle together and we appreciate things about the similarities that we have, but it's the very differences of the nature of our approach to art that I think I personally appreciate the most about John and some of my other close friends in the field.
John, do you want to deny all of that, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. It's we were brought together to be a sort of the boy band of horror fiction.
The Bookhouse Boys.
The Bookhouse Boys, right? Exactly. Ellen Datlow masterminded it, and then it backfired on her. We appeared, as Laird said, you know, in FNSF at the same time. In that summer, right? It was the summer right after my wife and I had gotten married, and it was, you know, not long before the September 11th attacks, you know, that sort of brief golden period, you know, and I think I know that Gordon Van Gelder, who was editing the magazine at the time, sent me an email and said, "Oh, you know, I don't know if you've checked out this Laird Barron story, but you should really look at this guy. I think you'll really appreciate him." And yeah, it was unlike anything else that anyone was doing, certainly in the magazine at that time. And no harm to anybody else, but it was really distinctive, and it was easy to see for me, like, why Gordon had picked that story, why Gordon would want that story in his magazine. And it's funny because I don't remember if we started corresponding then, or if it was after the Imago series. Was it? No. Old Virginia was next, right? So was it after Old Virginia maybe that we start? I don't
about then.
You know, but in any event, we like we had at first this really like dreadfully formal, chorus. It was like, well, practically 19th century, "My dear Mr. Barron, I am writing to express my utmost appreciation for your literary accomplishment. My dear Mr. Langan, warmest regards."
Wait a minute. Who wrote first?
I don't know. It could have been me. I think it was me, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
And yeah, we were just kind of in sync. And Laird's right that like there was that feeling of being like the horror kids, because that was the time in the early 2000s where you had like the new weird. So you had all these people who might otherwise have identified themselves as horror writers being like, "We're not horror writers, we're the new weird." And there was some great work that was being done there, but they made it absolutely clear that they had no interest in traditional horror, being associated with traditional horror fiction. So yeah, you would go to a convention like ReaderCon, which in a lot of ways I really like. I don't really mean to badmouth ReaderCon, but just it has been my observation that in a lot of these kinds of conventions, you'll have the science fiction and the fantasy people arguing with each other about which is the better genre, but then they sort of turn and they can at least agree that at least they're not the horror people, At least we're not those filthy degenerates,
Right.
But yeah, over time, I think that for both Laird and I, like our reading in places maybe overlapped. So there were writers like Peter Straub and King and Ted Klein that we'd grown up reading and we really loved. But there were also other writers. I had read Cormac McCarthy, but I wasn't as profoundly influenced by him as Laird was. And I don't know who the reciprocal writer would be, Henry James maybe, or something like that. But
actually, that's who I would have thought of. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that just that there was this, and I always come back to this, that for me there was just this real sense of integrity to what Laird was doing as a writer, and yeah, it's what I've responded to as well in people like Stephen Graham Jones and Paul and Livia Llewellyn,
Nathan Ballingrud,
that people who just they're serious about this stuff. They take it seriously. It's not a wink and a nod and, well, okay, is there or isn't there? It's like, no, there is a monster here, and let's see what we can do with this. And so and then, yeah, we just had all these other weird, I mean, it's true because we come from very different backgrounds in a lot of ways, but we just had all these common interests: martial arts, Japanese culture, movies, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, that we just, our friendship over time was kind of built on that. And, I think there was sort of the feeling too that like this is going to sound sort of pretentious, but that like we kind of knew we were doing something. I don't think we ever really talked about this in these terms, but we knew that we were trying to do something with horror fiction. We were trying to do something that, yeah, had its own integrity. We were trying to treat the material like seriously and to do right by it, but we were also trying to maybe take it in different directions and bring in different kinds of influences. And I think we had the feeling that we had that in common. And I think that was also kind of a bond for us as well.
No, I can see that. No, it doesn't sound pretentious to me. I see what you're saying.
Just wait, listen to it again, and then you'll be like, "Oh my God, who does that guy think he is?"
You've been way more pretentious than that on this show. So,
oh well, that's a relief, you know.
Yeah, but I have to say, I have to give a lot of credit for any success that I have to a lot of people. You don't do this. I mean, you write on your own, but publishing, it's an overlap. It's a separate beast. It overlaps. But if you're going to be successful in publishing, you need help, generally speaking, unless you're some kind of entrepreneur. But I have to give credit to Ellen and Datlow and Gordon Van Gelder, not only for publishing. I'll just speak for myself here. Not even for publishing me early on, but for giving me things to think about. Like Gordon in particular asked me early on, what I was planning for my career, and he said it's good to have a plan. And I don't think every writer has a plan when they start out. I think they write what they want to write. They may have a plan for like what their book's going to be, but they don't necessarily have how they're going to market it. But they don't necessarily have a plan for themselves over the next few years. And I don't mean branding or anything like that. I mean more just, what are you going to focus on? What kind of writer are you in the publishing world? What kind of writer are you going to be? And, are you going to be somebody who has a very distinct identity because of what they write, or because of the genre? Or are you going to try to be a writer who, it doesn't matter what you write, you are you, and people read you for you? And Gordon's advice to me right off the bat was, because he referred to me as a horror writer, and it wasn't very cool necessarily to be referred to as a horror writer. And he says, does that bother you? And I said, absolutely not. And he says, excellent. He goes, if my advice to you is to practice and hone your skills as a horror writer for the next 3 or 4 years, develop an identity, and then, if you want to branch out. And I don't think that advice is right for every single person, but it was right for me. It got me thinking. And so I've had a plan for my writing life from the beginning, pretty much. And so I give them a lot of credit. And the other aspect of credit that must be rendered is that Ellen and Gordon took a lot of chances with my writing early on. Gordon once told me he didn't publish that debut. This might be something that's interesting to people trying to break in, not as a piece of advice, but just something to think about. Gordon didn't publish that story. He told me he didn't publish that story because it was the greatest story. It wasn't something that normally they would publish. He published it because he understood from years and years of working in the business and having worked as an assistant under Ferlin, that a lot of times when you reject people, they don't send anything else in. And if you're interested in seeing something else from them, if it's publishable, it may be worth investing in. And so he invested in me. He said, I wanted to see what you would do with another story. He goes, and I didn't know if you would send me another one if I rejected it. And he goes, obviously he wouldn't have taken it if he thought it was terrible or something like that. It was just, the point was, the story itself wasn't what sold him. It was the potential. And he wanted to see that. And so he bought the story, and then I sent him Old Virginia, which is about as different as you could get. And he was quite surprised. But I just want to, those two editors in particular, there's been many, many since, and I'm not going to enumerate, them because I don't want to leave people out. But they gave me a lot of chances to become the writer that I am. Because if you reject somebody, I've written a lot of strange stories that are not straightforward narratives. And Ellen goes, I trust you. I don't necessarily think, if she hates something, she hates it. But she gave me more rope. And then, luckily I found an audience. And so her investment has been rewarded. But I really do love them for that. They allowed me to do what I needed to do. And if they would have said no to everything, which was well within their right, I would probably be writing whatever type of story that stuck with them would be the kind of story that I would probably be writing, or not writing at all. I
That's
my
really
life would be a
an
lot
amazing
more.
anecdote. Editors investing in you to see what you come up with.
Well, just one last thing about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like with agents. I think a lot of people who don't have an agent, have never had an agent, haven't worked with serious editors. And I'm not talking about, because there's all different levels of editors, but whether they're a famous editor working for Putnam or whether they're a small press editor, they're good editors all through the spectrum of that, independent up through the so-called big leagues. But people who haven't worked with editors a lot, pro editors, sometimes don't understand what they and agents do fundamentally. They have a misapprehension about what they do. And I'll tell you something. And I learned this when I was racing sled dogs. A lot of times it's the dogs you leave at home that determine whether you're going to be successful on your marathon. And likewise, what you don't mess with a writer about, what you leave in the manuscript or what you let an author do is just as important as marking up the manuscript. And their secret genius, the secret genius of any really great editor who's not a Lish type figure, is they know when to leave you the fuck alone. Mm. And those two, all the good editors I've worked with, know when to say, no, Laird, that's not working. But they also know when to go. Just because I don't particularly like it, I still think it works. Let's run with it. And that's what's made me a better writer, is them allowing me to have that freedom.
Yeah, I would agree that Gordon and Ellen were, and in Ellen's case has remained just crucial to my own development as a writer. I remember, man, a long time ago, Jeff Ford talking about, and this is like 15 years ago, talking about how he had learned as much from being edited by Ellen as he had any writing class he took in college or anything like that. And I think there's that in and of itself, right, is a really powerful endorsement, it seems to me, of the importance of a good editor. When a great writer is saying this, I've learned from this person, right there, that's well, it's just quite the tribute, isn't it? When I think about the story I tell at FNSF is that when I submitted my first story to it, it had been a long time since I'd read it. And it was mostly a matter of, I had this long story and I didn't know where to send it. And my wife had, during her PhD program, had learned that when you write an article, you start at the top. You don't do what my first impulse was, which was, can I find some little fanzine that'll publish this thing, right? You start right at the top. And if you get in at the top, that's awesome. You're in at the top. If you don't, what's the big deal? It was the top, but at least you made the try. And then, you work your way down the ladder as opposed to working your way up the ladder. So anyway, when I got into FNSF, and I was just utterly astonished, I hadn't read the magazine in a while, right? Well, but of course I subscribed to it after that. I was like, I better subscribe to this, Sorry, Gordon. So fast forward a couple of years until my younger son was born, and he had a lot of problems with what used to be called colic, which is baby acid reflux, right? And he had a tough time sleeping for any longer than about 45 minutes at a time. Because of the acid reflux. But if I held him, I could get him to sleep. So he was sort of up a little bit. I could get him to sleep for an hour and a half, right? So I couldn't really nap with him in my arms. So I was like, well, I've got this pile of FNSF. I guess I better read this thing. And it'll sound perverse, but I'm so glad I didn't read it before I submitted to it, because if I had, I never, ever would have submitted. Because when I looked at the stories that were in there, stories by M. Rickert and Lucius Shepard and Jeff and Laird, and I mean I had read Laird stuff throughout the time, right? But there were so many other things that I had just whatever, skimmed past. Oh, Ford, whoever, Alex Irvine, whatever, And then I actually read these things, and I was like, oh my God, this is just this amazing variety of stories, and this incredible standard of quality that Gordon was able to maintain. It kind of. There was a sort of weird feeling of vertigo for me where I almost felt like, oh my God, I'm in a much better place even than I realized, I kind of, people talk right about sort of imposter syndrome, right? I think, I had this sort of case of retroactive imposter syndrome or something where I thought, how did I get in here? How was this even possible? And, Gordon was his editing touch was very, very light in comparison to some of what Ellen and I have gone through, where we've really had these detailed discussions. But the thing about Gordon that struck me was my second story, Mr. Gaunt. He came back to me and he said, the ending, there's just something's off about the ending. And he said, I don't know what it is. See what you can come up with. And I gave him like 3 different endings until we finally hit the right one. And he said to me, man, this is just like what happened with Stephen King when he gave us, I think it was Everything's Eventual. And he said, he went through 3 endings as well. And, I know like it was incredibly gracious for a new horror writer to be told that, you're going through the same thing that Stephen King went through.
Yeah.
So he was also a really good kind of coach that way, and in terms of knowing the comparison to make that obviously I still remember. And I think Ellen, for as much as she busts my chops and will bust anybody's chops in person, or talking about them on the Lovecraft e-zine,
And she did.
in terms of in-person stuff, or I should say in terms of like say the prologues to her Year's Best Horror, she said really nice things, really complimentary things about myself and about Laird over the years, and that matters. It matters when you pick up the Year's Best Horror and Ellen's like, look, some of the best stories this year were from John Langan or were from Laird Barron or Livia Llewellyn or whoever. That helps you. It definitely helps your soul, I guess you might say.
That's just real quick sidebar, but interesting that you did not read the magazine before submitting to it, because that's exactly the opposite advice that most writers hear. Read a few issues of the magazine at least, and
oh yeah, it's advice I would give.
Yeah, exactly.
It's smart advice, but I'm in the same boat. I'd heard of it, but I was destitute pretty much at that time when I wrote that story and sent it in, and I was just saying to places that I could afford. But what happened is I was walking down the street. I was living in Seattle, and I saw a magazine lying in the gutter, and a lot of people around there read, and they read magazines and stuff. And so somebody had fallen out of their backpack or whatever, and it was ruined. It was in a mud puddle, and it was all gummed up, and so it was really even difficult to read it. But I looked at it, and I'm kind of trying to go through and read it. Then it had the submission, like a brief submission guidelines in the back, and I went, I had no thought of selling anything to them. I just sent it to them because a couple places that I had sent it to had lost it. And so, yeah, it was just same. I'm in the same boat. And like I said, Gordon didn't buy it because it fit in the magazine. He bought it because it interested him. And, some inside baseball, I mean, this stuff comes up I see it on social media all the time. Good, bad, indifferent, but people trying to break in, musing about how the field works, rejectomancy. How do you break in? Is there a cabal? There's a couple things. One, people have been talking recently about, well, it's the same group of people in all the anthologies and blah, blah, blah. And I think there's some truth to that, but I would also, say, do what I did and do a deep dive into who and what have been published for the last 60 years in the genre magazines, for example, right? because you can go to, what is it, the IS, I can never get the
ISFDB,
yeah, the database. You can go and you can look at everything that's ever been published just about, if you want to sit there. And I did that. I started like in the 50s, and I was looking at the major magazines a few years ago, and I'm looking at all the people who became more well known and people who were, who published crap loads with magazine fantasy and science fiction or Galaxy or Analog or whatever, and then disappeared once they stopped publishing. And some of them published for other magazines, and some of them were only out, like house authors almost. And what I noticed and what I see today, it's very frustrating for people because they think it's the same. It really does seem like the same group of people. That's it. That's who's being published. That's who's winning the awards, all this stuff. Well, part of that is there is some truth to it, but it's the impression is exacerbated by instant communication. We don't even have a 24-hour news cycle now. We have like, well, what did CNN say an hour ago? How come Ellen hasn't responded to this email? It's been 20 minutes already. Even old fogies like myself have to remind myself that I used to mail things off and then forget about it for 6 weeks or 6 months, maybe a year. So we're very impatient. But what I will tell you, and I'm watching it happen with Ellen, because I haven't published as much with magazines or anthologies the last couple of years because I've been working on the crime series, which is limited by how prolific I can be with writing short fiction. And what I'm noticing though is, there's some of the same names that Ellen has a giant so-called stable of names that she likes to work with. But if you follow her career all the way back into the Omni days, there are some people that are still like a through line. There are still some people that she occasionally publishes, but she'll have groups of people. Other editors do this. There'll be a group of writers that are like they're in everything, and then half of them are in the next year's anthologies, but it's new people. And then after 5 or 6 years, you're like, wow, she hasn't published Laird in years, type of thing. And so there's a lot. If you look at the history of how publishing works in our little neck of the woods, I'm not saying we can't do better, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't demand or agitate for better. I'm just kind of raising the point that it's not always what it seems to be. That I think there's a certain amount of distortion that goes on. I don't mean manipulation or intentionally, but I mean I think our perceptions are distorted partially because of how impatient we have become. But nobody stays on top forever. It's a tiny little group of writers that stay on top. And the second part of it is, it's like I said, it's not really advice. It's just what happened with John and myself. Gordon had a discussion with me, and John may or may not have been there, but he had done an interview and he described his philosophy about managing the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, like a baseball team, like the New York Yankees. He said, I've got my home run hitters. I got I got sluggers. I've got guys that are always good for, a triple or they're, base hits. And that's kind of how he went. And at some point, I don't know if it was in that conversation or when I was talking to him, but he described me and John and Dale Bailey at the time. I mean, like I said, he had other horror authors that came in there. And it wasn't that we were like his favorites or anything like that, but we fulfilled a role for him at the time. He could count on us to turn in stuff that was popular, or at least, or just the opposite and equally important, reviled. Like in my case, there would always be a handful of people. He said, I always get, anywhere from 1 to 5 people that cancel their subscriptions when I run one of your stories. I said, I'm sorry. He goes, don't be sorry. It's great. He goes, the best thing is to either be the most loved story in an anthology or to be hated. He goes, you just don't want to be ignored. And he goes, and and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but essentially his message to me was, no, this is great. Controversy, the only thing worse than, you just don't want to be not spoken of. Right. But we fulfilled a role for him. And like I said, this isn't so much me trying to give advice to anybody, because you can't. Your career is your career. Your path is your path, if you're writing and publishing. But this is the kind of stuff, these are calculations that were being made, and I assume that they still are. Editors, I don't think they just pick out of a hat. There's a certain congruence of overlap between wanting to get fresh names and people that they like, and also people that fulfill certain functions for them in their mind for their anthology or their magazine or whatever it is they're putting together. There's a place for a Laird Barron story, maybe, for particular editors. Because I know Laird's going to do something like this, or John, well, we need a story without paragraphs. Who can we turn to? John.
I'll get you, Barron. No, I think that's very true. I mean, things to, what I was thinking about in part, right, was the group of Laird and myself and Paul and Stephen and Livia and Dale and Nathan and I was thinking about a conversation that was held at ReaderCon when they weren't bashing the horror kids, where they were talking about what they called the triumph of competency. And it was this kind of self-conscious moment where they were like, man, we have all these writing workshops like, Clarion and Odyssey and all this kind of stuff and MFA programs and what have you. And a lot of times in those workshops, especially I think the 6-week ones, the shorter and more intensive ones, the goal is I want to get published. How do I get into Asimov's FNSF analog? Or these days it would be, I guess, how do I get to Tor.com or Nightmare or some kind of online venue? And so what, to a certain extent, what the how would you put it? The thrust of the conversation was what winds up happening is what makes your work really wacky and out there and all that kind of stuff gets sanded off so that you can fit into this slot, And I've always thought, from Gordon's conversations with myself and with Laird, right, that part of what he was looking for and what he responded to in our stuff was that we hadn't been to workshops, that we didn't have that kind of smoothness, but that he found our kind of, the weirdness of our writing, if you will, like that actually was kind of refreshing to him. It kind of stood out. Now, look, some people, workshops are the way to go for them. And I'm certainly not suggesting, Langan hates workshops. No, if a workshop is your thing, do it. If a workshop would like to hire me to teach, that would be even better. But I think there was some, oh man, who was it? It might have been Lucius. It might have been somebody else who talked about that advice that young writers are, slaughter your darlings or kill your darlings or whatever. And this writer was like, that's insane. Treasure those things, save those things, work from those things. Those are the things that make you who and what you are, and not just another knockoff Hemingway or Carver or whoever. So I think that was something that worked for us and for the other writers. I guess I think of myself as being friends with, and also whose work like Stephen's or Paul's or Livia's, I really get excited by. I'm like, oh man, let's see what Stephen Graham Jones has next. Serial killers, who knew? That really, or Brian Evanson for that matter. Somebody else who's, you're just like, what the heck? So Victor Laval, And I think those are things for young writers too that are also worth thinking about. Patience, man. Patience is what Laird was just saying, right? I mean, it's the problem with instant communication. When we had to mail, went back in my day, but when you had to mail off a story to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, you might get an email reply telling you that your story had been sold, but you had a 3-month wait time minimum, and that was FNSF was really quick. Their rejections were kind of famously quick. They rejected the story before I submitted it. You get a phone call from Gordon. Don't bother. No, but yeah, they were, but even so, there was this idea that, okay, I've got to wait. And while I'm waiting, I might as well do my next thing. I should write my next story or write my book or whatever it is.
Well, it's something. I mean, I'm getting to the point where I even hate giving advice because people really seem like they take it as a pronouncement sometimes, even though that seems to be the common question. What advice do you have?
Right.
And what
Not
people
that
really,
advice.
Right. Really what people want is, what's the secret? And
Right.
they don't nobody likes hearing what the secret is, which is luck combined with working and submitting, basically dogged determination. And maybe you have some talent.
Yeah.
But they don't like hearing that.
Not giving up too.
Yeah. Well, nobody likes to hear the like part or the luck part. Like, I got lucky. That's all, I'm not here today because of luck. I think I've earned whatever I have through proving it over and over and over and over. But I damn well was lucky when I started. And you know what? Lots of people write for years and they maybe deserve. Like, I'll give you an example. Why is Stephen Graham Jones being heralded for this latest novel? It's like his 20th fucking novel. And he's always been good. And he should have been a bestseller 20 novels ago.
Yeah, you wrote something on Twitter, I remember.
I just rolled my eyes. I'm glad they're finding him.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's been here for years.
You wrote something to the effect of people don't like to hear hard work, anything creative. Hard work is part of it. Not giving up is part of it, but so is luck. And you said something like there are far more talented, I'm paraphrasing badly because it was like a year ago. There are far more talented writers than me who are toiling in obscurity.
That's right. I know tons of horror writers who are weird fiction writers or people who just work on the periphery who do not get the recognition that they deserve. And up until recently, Stephen didn't. And this is with Ellen Datlow, for example, for years. Hey, read Stephen. And she's very, her anthologies are widely read. The bottom line is he deserved all the success that he has coming to him right now. It's been coming to him for years. And you know what? In another universe, this book didn't sell either. Some knob somewhere said, nah. And so fine, he sold it to a university press like he did a lot of other novels. And the bottom line is there's an being talented is you have to have all these ingredients, or it's good to have them, but luck, and there's an arbitrary nature to this, or an aspect to this. But what I was going to say is to John's point, I'm sorry to hijack your point, John, it's just that we kind of straddle. I feel sort of lucky because I'm old enough to remember playing 8-track tapes, but I also appreciate touchscreen computers, and I've lived in the woods and I've lived in pretty fancy lodgings. I've kind of seen the spectrum of things. I've been around long enough to see this progression and sort of appreciate it. What I have, appreciate what I used to have, maybe mourn for some of the things I used to have, but go, look, this is all part of what we're going through. The bottom line is one aspect that I do think that has served me well is that I've always written to write. And I feel like John has always written to write. And this isn't a matter of quality. You can be you can be a total mercenary who probably doesn't really care about writing besides, I'm good at it. And sell books and do well and maybe be critically acclaimed. But I'm talking about the average person who doesn't see, the average writer is not going to see a lot of success in his or her career. They're not going to get rich from writing. They're not going to win a bunch of awards. They're not going to make lists of the best horror novels of the decade. That's not going to happen for most people. That just isn't going to happen. Or worse, you'll have it for a while and then, who was that guy that used to write whatever. The bottom line is it's a tough business. And back in the day, we didn't so much rely on the instant. You push the button and then you start waiting. Yeah, you watch your mailbox, but if you send it to overseas, it's going to be 6 months before you hear back. And 99 times out of 100, it's going to be no. And so you wrote, like John said, you worked on the next thing. But you didn't just write the next thing because, I got to keep myself busy. It's what you did. And you weren't tempted as much to sit there and perseverate over the fate of this one story. You were pretty much forced to focus on, I'm a writer and I don't get instant gratification all the time for being a writer. Even when you do sell something, the first few stories I sold, the internet message boards were still, some people talked about stories on them, some didn't. I wasn't getting a lot of feedback the first couple stories. If I got a review, I was like, wow, I got a review. Oh, they hated it. Oh, damn it. So the point being is I remember what it was like to have like almost zero instant gratification. And so my motive for most of my career, at least it's founded in, I wrote because it's what I do. Yes, I had a goal. I want to be published. I would like to do it for a living. But until I could make a living, I just sent stories out and I went to my crappy day job. And I wrote, it fulfilled me to write. And I think, I don't want to cast aspersions or anything, but I don't know. I think that's an easy trap to fall into in this particular era that we're living in, where and I think workshops sometimes do feed that kind of mentality, that the product, you start thinking about things as product. I hear people talk about inventory. I probably even use that term. It's not inventory and it's not product, even though you can that is a side effect of it. It's art. And if you treat it as art that you can make money on, yay, you'll be happier, because you're not going to be Stephen King, most likely, or Stephen Graham Jones. And like I said, if Stephen Graham Jones thought he was going to be a best-selling author, he would have been very sad for 25, 30 years of his writing career. So
do it because you love to do it.
Make of that what you will.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, speaking of Stephen King, I mean, when at the beginning, Mike, when you were like, "Oh, what's your reason for, you know, motivation and all this kind of stuff," you know, and I was thinking about, you know, that Stephen King quote that says, "What makes you assume I have any choice?" Right. And there were ways in which I don't know that I see myself as driven to the way that King seems to be, where, you know, that he's you know, writing in a McDonald's sort of thing, you know, like just so. But that aside, if I'm not writing, I'm a miserable person. Even more so. If I'm out of sorts, if I know that things, I'm just like, what is wrong with me? You know, and I'm, oh man, it's been a couple days since you've been writing. You got to get back to that. And I think that to be honest, that is the reason to do it. If what you're interested in is something resembling sanity, because otherwise, man, if you're looking for, I don't know what, financial success, good luck with that. And again, you know, can any of these things happen? Sure they can. But think about those people that you see. When I go to our local convenience store, you know, and I see people standing at the lottery, playing the lottery or playing the various tickets and that sort of stuff. And I always feel kind of bad for those people. And I'm not talking about the person who's like, it's the big Powerball. Just what the heck? Give me a ticket. I'm talking about the people that you just see in there regularly. And then they're like, I won $10. Give me another 10 of those, you know? And you just think, what's, you know, like, so I feel like counting on the fact that you're going to be the person who writes the next big bestseller, that feels uncomfortably close to that. It may happen. I'm not saying it can't happen, but just if that's what you're shooting for and what you're expecting, I feel that's going to be really soul crushing. So I think that, and in the same way, if you're looking for the pleasing your friends, I guess, God help you, you're looking to please your family, that all feels like a mug's game to me. Sure, look, it's absolutely great when your friends or your family say, oh my God, I read this, we love this. You know, I'd left a story lying around a couple of years ago, the manuscript of it, and I was a complete, you know, he said it was accidental. Anyway, and my wife just found it and read it and left me this note. You're a great writer. This is terrific, you know. And obviously, like, I still remember that. That was really great. But in a way, I'm not even writing for her, because in a way, that's not a fair burden to place on her. Or my kids or my mom or whoever.
It was the only story she liked. I mean,
well, it's true. It was. I was like, I have it framed. I had it laminated. Actually, it hangs around my office. But I think, and it's not to belabor the point too much, but if you're looking for, you know, whatever kind of validation, external validation through your writing, I think you have to look elsewhere. I think you know, the writing has to be the validation for the writing.
You guys are talking about something that's always been really close to my heart, and you're saying it a lot better than I ever have. But it's just, maybe, I've been accused of, oh, that's just, idealism. But, it's great if what you do becomes popular or makes you a lot of money or puts you on the bestseller list or everything. But should that really be your motivation? And
well, you know what, Mike? Think about it this way.
It's like you mentioned Stephen King, John. The guy is richer than God. I mean, he does not continue writing because he wants his next paycheck. Because he has no choice, like you said. A friend of mine who's not here today because he doesn't feel well, Pete Rawlick, you guys know him.
Mhm.
Sadly, yeah.
Yes, Pete. He can't not write, and he's busy as hell. He has a family, he has a job. He doesn't need the money per se because he's got a good job, but he just can't not write. So I'm sorry, John, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that I know absolutely nothing about sports. Nonetheless, let me reach for this example from sports. Please
do. So you put the football through the net.
Through the hoop,
Yeah.
But no, it's from what I've observed, and I'm not talking about like are they good people or not, but I think about Roger Federer in tennis or Tom Brady in football. These athletes who just the sport is the thing, and either one of them could. And I'm sure, I'm sure people can think of many more examples like this where, either one of them could retire at any moment and everyone would be like, you're a legend, but
right.
Man, as long as they can keep doing it, they love it. And you kind of have the feeling, with Federer anyway, I don't, I'm not as sure about, as someone who lives in New York, I really can't say anything good about Tom Brady, but you have the feeling that like if Federer were not playing on the professional circuit, he would be like down at the local YMCA
right.
or whatever, like coaching
right.
kids and, screaming at them,
Well, I sometimes I wonder, how did I get into this almost 10 years ago? And
drugs, Mike, the answer is.
It
was part of your court-ordered rehab.
They help. But, I remember went to a Christmas party several years ago. Most of my relatives are in Fort Worth. And my uncle, nice guy. I don't want to disparage my uncle at all. Really, really nice guy. But, when he was 17, he went to work for a local company, and he just retired. I mean, basically the year I was born, 71, he went to work for this company, and 3 years ago he retired.
1871. Holy shit, that's a long time.
Yeah, that is a long time.
That poor guy. He built the country.
But to him, that is what you're supposed to do. And that's a responsible life. And, at this party a few years ago, he's like, are you still doing that, talk show, horror website thing, whatever you're doing? I'm like, yeah. He goes, you making money at it? I'm like, well, I'm breaking even. I just love doing it. That's just all there is to it. I'm sorry. I hope suddenly I get 1 million views each podcast, but and it is, relatively speaking, popular. That's not why you do it. I can't agree with you guys more about this. It's something that's pretty close to my heart.
Yeah, I remember when I was pursuing my PhD, which, I will forever be ABD at this point. There were people who were fellow students who were kind of doing it like because they could, not because they necessarily loved it, but just because they were like, oh, well, a professor seems like not such a bad life and that sort of stuff. And maybe, who am I to judge them, right? But I do remember thinking, man, like if this isn't something you kind of like you need to do, I'm not sure that the investment is worth it. Certainly with writing, I don't know. I mean, lots of people do it for lots of reasons. I sound like a freshman essay. But I think that it's still, I think you maybe need to think about those reasons a little bit,
Yeah.
you know?
My wife sure as hell is not teaching at a local kind of impoverished public school when she has a law degree and used to be a prosecuting attorney, because she can no longer be a lawyer. She can be a lawyer. She can go back to being a lawyer anytime. But this is a fucking passion with her. You know, she loves those kids. She loves helping them. She feels like she's making a real difference.
Plus, after she fell in love with you while she was prosecuting you, she was like, I can't do this job anymore.
That's right.
And then,
I was her last case.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It was, movie
material. She
admired
married Sam Elliott.
Exactly. She married Sam Elliott.
It's the same thing. I admire the hell out of her for that attitude, especially right now. She's on drug. Just, Laird, you've been talking about this on Twitter. But, you know, sometimes, but this upcoming school year, she's under just a hell of a lot of stress. And nobody knows what the fuck they're doing in leadership. But is she quitting? No, other teachers have quit. A lot of them have. So, yeah. Listen, I just want to say one more quick thing, and then I want to get into you guys' latest works and Coleridge and so forth, because I have learned that if I go past the 2-hour mark on Yahoo, I run into all sorts of technical problems, so I don't want to do that. Besides, you guys will be sick of talking with me at that point anyway. You were talking about this instant communication thing, Laird. You know, I'm a big fan of, I've read Walden more times than I can count, and, you know, simplicity and things like that. And it is very easy, I would say, and I know this is a little off topic, but just to reference what you said, it's very easy to fall into that trap. But I try not to. It doesn't mean somebody emails me and they get a reply back a month later, but it's just like, look, there are very few emergencies in the podcast / writing / whatever it is I do world, you know? Last Sunday, this reporter emailed me. He wanted a quote from me about a Lovecraft article he was writing, you know, because Lovecraft Country and all that. And then the next day, one of my followers, he sent me a link to the article. Oh, look at this cool article. I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is the same guy. And because I didn't get to him that day, he wanted a quote that Sunday, you know, and I wasn't fast enough. You know, I'm sorry, I'll never be built that way. I just can't do it. So it's just, I know we live in that kind of world, but I don't have to be that way. And I think it's important for everyone to realize that you do have a choice. So anyway, first question I would like to ask, the easy question would be to ask for Laird, describe your work, describe the Coleridge series, which you're on number 3 right now. You know, what kind of horror writer are you, for those who have not read everything you've written? And same questions more or less to John. But what I would really like to do is for Laird to tell me, what kind of horror writer do you see John as? What do you admire about him?
Sorry.
Is there anything that you admire? You know, and then for John, for you to do the same thing. And then let's talk about Coleridge and Children of the Fang and Worse Angels and so forth.
Yeah, we can do that. I'll talk about John's work. John, it's funny because I've been watching, you know, through our friendship, so it's a different lens, I guess. But because it's just Stephen and John and Paul to me, and Livia and SP Miskowski. They're just, you know, my friends, my comrades. But when I step back from it, look at John's work, you know, you see this progression over the years, and that's one of the ways that I always, you know, we talked about the integrity of the work. You can do the same thing over and over again. I think that's perfectly viable. I certainly have. I like to interrogate the hard-boiled tough guy, or tough, you know, POV protagonist, you know, the protagonist who's got a hard bark. But, you know, you can do that, and you can do it sort of, you know, sort of repetitively, or you can or you can see like this sort of sense of sequence of progression. And I'm watching John's work over the years, and the stuff that makes John's work, him is there, sort of a bedrock or a spine that runs through his work. But there's this progression over the years. It's like a great musician or a great band, they'll always sound on some level. You're like, oh yeah, I recognize them from their punk days. And now they're doing world beat music, or they're doing, something completely different. Maybe they're metal now. But you listen to them change over the years, and their influences broaden. That's one thing I would say about John is when I first started reading John, I felt like, yeah, M.R. James, Henry James, Stephen King, that seemed to be, early, maybe a little Bradbury, Matheson. There was a handful of those authors who I immediately said, oh, this is, when I was dissecting John's work, these are some of the writers that he obviously that influenced him. But as time has gone on, I mean, there are so many other influences that, partially, I think, infused in his work, but also that he's played around with. John does a lot of writing that is fundamentally, okay, I'm going to sit down and tell you a story. He likes to do the story within a story, the frame story.
Yeah, I love that.
With lots of apocryphal information in it, almost found footage, or epistolatory kind of writing. But over the years, he's mutated how he approaches that, different ways to throw that at you or to come at it from a different angle, which I think great artists do. I forget who it was that said, I get accused of being repetitive as a writer for coming back to whatever theme it is. Maybe Stephen King said this, but when an artist comes back to, like if a famous singer comes back to love, it's just their latest interpretation on love. It's murder ballads this time instead of melancholy ballads. And we accept that. Well, John does that, but he also branches out into, his writing is mutated. But what you get with John is I would say the through line of John's fiction, be it short fiction or his not so short fiction and his novels, is this sense of immersion. John has many preoccupations, but the through line is to immerse you in a real world in all its quotidian detail, and then gradually destabilize you. I described the weird. I helped edit the year's best weird, the first, the first volume. Thank you to Michael Kelly for honoring me with that. And we were tasked to, I don't know how many times, describe the weird, and the word destabilization came up over and over again. And that also can work for horror too. There's many different types of horror. Destabilization isn't always the fundamental aspect of it or characteristic, but in a lot of John's work, it is. There's this destabilizing, so the horrific weirdness, but it derives usually from him putting you in the pot and then slowly turning up the heat, and then it's too, and by the time you realize that it's boiling, it's too late. You're cooked. And so I would say that's like the great strength of his, is this verisimilitude to his writing. And it's very gentle a lot of the time. And of course there are exceptions. There are some stories like The Rebel that opens up, full blown action. But that's just another example of somebody who's written a lot of stories over a lot of years, and they do a lot of different things. The through line though is to lull you. And I don't know if anybody lulls better than John does. And the other aspect of his writing that I think is really something, if somebody were dissecting it and writing a paper on it, would be his repurposing of what has come before. John and I agree on something we're very different, but we do agree on one thing. I think we both are from the camp of the ecstasy of influence rather than the anxiety of influence. We have no problem. John has no problem, winking at you and going, yeah, this is how Henry James might have said something like this, or this is how John Carpenter might have framed something, or this is, I was inspired. There's no guile or artifice. There's no coyness. It is just like, I like John Carpenter, and this is going to be, if you watch John Carpenter, guess what? This is a real John Carpenter style story, or this is an M.R. James type story. And it's not even the retelling of it, although he does that too. But he takes the pieces of it, and we all do this to some degree. Whatever genre it is, if you're working within a convention or you're working within a genre, there is always going to be dealing with what came before, and you can either be antagonistic with it, which is fine. So you're wrestling with it and fighting with it and trying to, and then get away from it as far as you can, like toss it behind you, or you embrace it.
Yeah, you made a statement one time recently, Laird, that I really loved on this. You said, okay, you want to compare me to this great writer and say that this particular work of mine is like that, I will, hella take that compliment.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, because no one's too generous, including those who have been given that title. We all are in dialogue, or we're all reacting to what we have consumed. Even when someone, says, like Ligotti famously says, he doesn't like Aikman, but I'm pretty sure he's read some Aikman. And so I used to be a little more skeptical until I started analyzing how this really all works, even for myself. Even stuff that you reject, it's in there. You have to have processed it to reject it. And some people are very knee-jerk and they reject it, like spit it right out. I think other people swish it around a bit, or it gets in their bloodstream, and they're like, yeah, I'm never eating Copenhagen again. I got sick. But
remember the creators of Welcome to Night Vale said, when they kept being compared to Lovecraftian stories, it's kind of a comedy, obviously, but they're like, no, we hate Lovecraft. That's not in there at all. And Stephen King's story in, he swears up and down there's no Lovecraftian influence in there at all.
Yeah,
but, yeah, there is.
It's and I say this with all kindness, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
The kindness is you just are deluding yourself. Now, I can say this though, because I don't see anything wrong with it,
right?
Whether it was intentional or not. But that's all I'm saying, is that John takes stuff that's come before and he embraces it. And then there's a couple things you can do. If you embrace it, you could just repeat it in your own nasally voice, or you can repurpose it in a way that people go, oh, this reminds me of Aikman, but it's different. And to me, all the stuff that I really love, whether it's Hollywood action films or whether it's literature, comics, that's literature too, but whatever medium it is, whatever genre it is, I really love stuff that's been done before, and they don't try to reinvent it. They just go, but what if it was told from this angle? What if he came at it like that? What if we left off these parts and we just did this? That's why I love Shakespeare reimaginings. Oh, it's going to be Hamlet in space. Wow. How's that going to go? And John does that. And I think that's one of the great powerful elements of his writing, is that he doesn't reject what's come before, and he doesn't imitate what's come before. He builds on what has come before. And I don't know anybody else who more blatantly or more doggedly does that story after story in our neck of the woods.
I want to read a bit of a review from Goodreads about Children of the Fang. This is by a gentleman by the name of Neil McRobert. And he says that indeed it has a lot of vibes, with each story seeming to pay homage to at least one horror luminary. This isn't to say what you're saying here, Laird. This is not to say that they don't have their own voice. They most definitely do. But that the tradition or genealogy, as Langan puts it, of horror fiction is present without. John Langan is quite the literary ventriloquist, but he also has a set of tools that are very much his own. So
well said.
Yeah. I remember I wrote a Gothic poem years and years, probably 20 years ago. And, you especially don't write poetry because you want to get paid for it. You just do it because you want to do it. And 90% of the people I would show it to on the internet, they were like, oh, this is great, I love it, which is nice to hear. And then this one group said, oh, this is trash, this is just regurgitated Poe. And I'm thinking, yeah, isn't a lot of stuff regurgitated Poe if you want to be that crass with the author's own twist on it, really? So.
Right. You can reduce anything.
Yeah.
Because some things are we do see that, but just because you're writing in the vein of someone doesn't make it good or bad. It's just a thing that you're doing. And in John's case, he does it really well.
And John, I noticed you got a very good review on Cemetery Dance online from Sadie Hartman. Is that her last name?
Yes. It was a lovely review from Mother Horror herself.
Yes.
For which, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm just very grateful. I'm still, good reviews never get old.
No.
I don't, this is something Laird and I have talked about. I don't think all reviews are created equal. There are writers who will say, don't read your reviews. And maybe that's the sanest thing. And then you'll have writers who will say, well, if you believe the good ones, you have to believe the bad ones. And I think that's utter BS. I mean, there have been times I've read a bad review and I thought, they've got a point. Okay, fair enough, But then there are other times, you read the review and you think, I didn't write that. That wasn't what I was, or what have you. So anyway, thank you though, Laird. I appreciate that.
Why don't you?
I just want to say one last thing.
Yes, please.
I've done a lot of introductions for writers, and I've written, small essays about quite a few writers now over the years. John would be a really easy writer for me to write about, not because of our friendship. I've said this many times. We're friends now just because we're friends, but we weren't friends initially just because we liked each other. We respected each other. For my part, I respected his work so much. And also what he was doing behind the scenes, organizing things, seminars and stuff to kind of promote horror and weird fiction. So, I would just toss that out there, is that a lot of my respect, for John is just because of what he represents as a person and a writer. But if I were to I could easily write a big old essay about his work, because it really does merit that kind of critical scrutiny.
The Children of the Fang is now available. You can pick it up via Kindle or print. Is it an audiobook too, John, or no?
No, not yet. Let's be optimistic.
But
not yet.
They're expensive. It's a collection of short stories by John Langan, and Laird spent a lot of time talking about what a talent he is as a writer. Do you want to touch on anything about Children of the Fang, John, before you talk about Laird's work and what you think?
No, just that the reception has been really lovely, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to everybody who said nice things about the book, and reviews and such up to this point. Well,
it's over now.
Yeah, it's over. That's this was the moment.
Hey, John, what's the just for everybody out there who hasn't read John, all his collections have, if they're not connected, they have usually thematically connected. There's an overarching theme. What's the theme in this one?
Yeah, the idea with this one was, number one, I wanted to do a big book, like a skeleton crew. That was my kind of model. But they were all like when we were kids, in the 80s, and you would get like the big Stephen King collection or Robert McCammon's Blue World, or
oh God, what a book. Yeah.
What is it called? The Books of Blood were all published separately, but you knew that was part of this big project, and I wanted something like that. And the last collection, Saphira and Other Betrayals, had been really tightly focused on betrayal, and I guess I was I wanted to do something that was a lot more loosey goosey. But then I got
nervous in your technical terms.
Yeah, that's and I thought to myself, is this like too unconnected? And then like sort of looking over the credits, actually, I realized that the book had been written for like different tribute anthologies, and I was like, oh, all right, so maybe you can think about this as like genealogy. Here are some of the branches on my family tree, and look, it's these branches are very white and they're very male, they're very straight, So I mean, I'm aware that writers who've meant a lot to me, like Shirley Jackson, or Angela Carter, or Willa Cather, for that matter, don't get mentioned in here really at all, or don't get referenced in here at all. So I I wouldn't want to say this is the last word in terms of what I think my influences are, or my genealogy, my family tree is. It's just one kind of snapshot of it.
Okay. Take a few minutes to talk about your thoughts on Laird's work.
Do I have to?
Well,
No.
Maybe 30, 45 seconds.
Okay, all right, that's all right. If I can keep it under a minute, it.
Take a deep breath, and then when you're out of breath, you're done.
I'm just like, no, I mean, I think what's kind of interesting for both of us, right, is to be, because we published in FNSF at the roughly the same moment. Now, it's sort of, I don't know, we've come up together in a lot of ways. Laird had published a story before me, Hour of the Cyclops, right? But other than that, our careers or our paths have kind of been in parallel. So it's kind of interesting in that now, like about 20 years in, you can look back over everything and you can say, oh, well, we're a good part of the way into it. In Laird's case, I mean, let's face it, he's almost done. We can look at each other's work and we can say, okay, how does it work, as it were? What are the themes? What are the concerns? What's it done? And so, when I think about Laird's early stuff, and just how, I mean, it's sort of impossible, I feel like, to overestimate how significant those first three collections were. And I think also the Croning, the novel, and Light is the Darkness. But I think if Laird had written nothing more than those first three collections, if he was just like, I'm going to go, I don't know what, become a monk in a monastery up in the mountains or something like that, I think that the influence that he had would have been just gigantic. And the reason for that, I think, is because of the way that those stories, took like the sort of the cosmic horror thing, and brought it into, in some ways, I think brought it into the 21st century, but they brought it sort of down to earth in a way, in that you had these people who were, real people, who were, in some cases very wealthy, in some cases not so wealthy, but they lived these real lives, and often their lives were lived on the margins of violence, or on the margins of a kind of brutality of existence, or something like that. That made them feel really visceral and viscerally believable, and then of course they came up against these things that were really frighteningly portrayed. So it wasn't just like, I mean, look, if some cosmic monster shows up and it gets me, like, nobody's going to be surprised. It's not going to be like, oh my God, it got John Langan. They're going to be like, of course it got Langan. I'm amazed he lasted that long.
Godzilla will protect you, John.
It's
German Godzilla.
German Godzilla. Whereas with these characters, it was kind of like, if these characters could be, and look, I'm oversimplifying. There are a lot of different kinds of characters. I'll get to that in a second. But it was like, if these characters can be overcome by these things, then man, it makes you realize once again how frightening these things are.
And how fragile we are.
Yeah, and look, I have to say, I mean, there were stories like the Lagerstadt or the Redfield Girls that showed that Laird's range as a writer in this stage of his career was already considerable. And I think that at the level of sentences, even though he has a few too many paragraph breaks for my taste, but I think at the level of sentences, there's just some lovely writing there. I mean, there was this kind of sentence, and attention to sentences that reminded, I suppose Cormac McCarthy is one of the places, and I think some of the poets that Laird had read as well. And what's fascinating to me, like from the kind of literary critical standpoint, right, is that those first three collections and the Croning and the Light is the Darkness, I think they form one kind of a unit. But then you get this new move where Laird really changes it. What's the right word? Not even changes his writing, but he does. But he develops it. He's like he's not. I mean, he could have just kept writing collection after collection like those first three, but instead he produces Swift to Chase, which is just insane. You know, it takes his style and it pares it down. And so it shows the influence, I think, of writers like Evanson and Dan Shawn and what have you. But then it puts those stories together into this kind of mosaic novel. I still think that's like one of the great underappreciated books, Swift to Chase. I think a lot of my impression is that a lot of people missed what was going on in that collection. And then of course you come to the Coleridge books, right? But here's the thing: you come to the Coleridge books, but then you've also got Laird has started writing a series of fantasy stories, which you know, they're like these kind of like D&D adventures, kind of meshed with I don't know what, you know, like because they feel like they're part of they're related to our world too. So in that regard, I suppose they remind me of something like King and Straub's The Talisman, where there's like this sort of shadow world that's kind of medieval, quasi-medieval, but also kind of like ours. And again, some of the writing in those is just astonishing. And it's the same, you see a lot of Laird's the similar kinds of preoccupations with people who are to whom a tough existence and maybe, you know, a violent existence is not a stranger, coming up against these things that are just, you know, how do you deal with them? And of course that brings me then to Coleridge, where you see that, you know, you see in the first book sets up who Coleridge is, and then each book to come after takes him in these increasingly dark and dire directions. I think that you know, Black Mountain reminded me very much of Straub, of Coco, and of The Throat, and therefore in a way of Dracula behind all of them, in that you have, you know, at the early on we're told that there's this monstrous figure, and then Coleridge spends most of the novel like just trying to track him down. Who is he? You know, and there are these kind of cryptic moments, you know, and then when we finally meet him at the end, he's this kind of terrifying figure. And I think Worse Angels, I mean, I think that is Laird's finest novel, qua novel. I mean, I think that I think that just does everything a good novel should do. I think it's brilliantly written and genuinely unnerving. And, you know, we were talking about the novel when I finished it, and I said, I said, like, I don't know how to put this without it sounding like a left-handed compliment, but he really gets at the tedium of detective work. He really gets at the idea that a lot of what being a detective is about is not like going in there and getting into gunfights and punching people out and that. It's just like, okay, I got a whole bunch of documents that I've got to sift through, and I've just got to try to figure out, do I see any connections among all these, you know, like say all these financial records, or I've got to fly or drive around the country and I've got to talk to people and I've got to interview them and I've got to see, you know, what is it they're telling me. But at the same time that he's doing that, you know, so that the sort of portrayal of almost the tedium of detective work, of real detective work, is contrasted with these kinds of background concerns, you know, these kinds of monstrous forces, which in some cases are corporate or, you know, sort of quasi-governmental or what have you. And so, yeah, it really, finishing Worse Angels, I immediately thought, where's the fourth Coleridge? I need to see more of this.
I think that a lot of people who are fans of Laird Barron's horror and have not read the Coleridge books yet don't really realize that it's, correct me if I'm wrong, please, Laird, but in the same universe. There's a lot of
No, they. I mean, I receive support. I have a lot of diehard fans, but and so a lot of them have supported me, and I've mission accomplished when it comes to making new fans in the crime community.
yeah.
But I'm kind of a victim of my own design. Is not crime enough for the crime crowd, and maybe not horror enough for the horror crowd. But they do take place in the same universe, and the third one is definitely the Worse Angels. Slid very, very much farther into true horror. I think I still think that it can be looked at because of the way that I wrote it. I really worked hard to make it work as that it really can be called a crime or a thriller novel, that it will work for those people,
Right.
because there is a thread, there's a fig leaf, there's a straw for skeptics to clutch, but it definitely is.
Well, we've talked about this before. John
horror
Conway did
novel.
the same thing in his Charlie Parker books. The
Right. Yeah, no, and I
yeah.
think that there's definitely like a I think for by the time you get to the end of Worse Angels, you can kind of Scooby Doo it. You can kind of say it was probably just the old Mr. McGonagall with his mask on down by the mill and all that. But there were also just some. There's also it's. If you do that as a reader, I think you're more aware that that's your choice as a reader to do that. You're just, there's certain things maybe that you're just not willing to accept. But I guess, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the Scooby-Doo, very briefly. The only difference with the Scooby-Doo is the Scooby-Doo, and I think it's accurate, but the revelation that it's, Mr. McGonagall, it's a very mundane, it's just a greedy old man.
Yeah.
Right? With very prosaic, if nefarious motivations, but we all understand. The one thing that I am very proud about this is that I've made the rational explanation almost as horrifying and strange as a supernatural explanation.
Yeah, no, I would.
My thesis is that sometimes the rational, because these things have happened to me in my life, where I'm left with, well, either that weird thing happened and it's weird, like it's supernatural, or the rational explanation is almost as bad. I'm hallucinating, or someone is playing pranks on me and they had the ability to get under my guard. In other words, so Coleridge's and the readers, their options are, it's weird with a supernatural element, or it's really weird and there's a rational element and the world is a lot weirder. My point being is the world's really a frightening place.
Yeah. And I guess
you get that sense when you read, I don't know if you guys have read Pen Pal.
Mm-hmm.
No, I haven't.
I've never read the whole thing, but I've read pieces of it.
Yeah, that's one scary book, and I don't want to say anything at all about it, because anything at all is spoilery, but you wonder what the fuck is going on through most of it.
Right.
And then when you find out, it's even worse than you could have imagined.
Right. The rational explanation,
Yeah.
I know how it goes. The rational explanation is bad or worse than any. Well, yeah.
Absolutely
Bad.
horrifying.
It's bad.
Yeah.
The other thing.
Well, it
is,
also, it does. For Laird and John, is that looking at it? It seems to me that noir and crime is the perfect bosom buddy to horror.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you have Jonathan Mayberry's edited. I think it's Hard Boiled Horror. You've got C.J. Henderson's Teddy London series. I mean, you can go on, and it just seems that these two genres are just made to be intertwined or at least explored.
Especially
Absolutely.
noir and weird.
Yeah, if you go back to actually M.R. James, speaking of which, writing at the early decades of the century, of the 20th century, he talked about that. He saw the sort of horror, the ghost story genre, and the sort of crime detective genre. They really shared a lot of property with one another, and I think he's absolutely right.
And Poe.
Yeah.
No, right. I mean, Poe invents the detective story, and
they're and it's horrific.
Yeah,
it's not Agatha Christie. It's not cozy in any way.
Yeah, it's an orangutan with a straight razor.
Right under your nose.
Yeah.
Well, we have to go. Thanks to Yahoo.
Yep.
I would love to keep talking for about another hour, but I learned my lesson a couple of weeks ago when I interviewed the people from Host and went to 2.5 hours.
And then that whole demon thing happened. That was
actually,
awkward.
It did.
That was awkward.
I managed to fix it, but I was not happy.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess my main point was saying that Coleridge is in the same universe Laird is not to say, hey, you Laird Barron horror fans, read Coleridge because you're going to get a horror payoff. You will, but that's not the only reason. They're fucking great crime novels. You know, they're great noir. And
you're right. They are connected to anybody who's read them, who reads my stuff. And be a very small group of people get this, but I'm actually writing a horror story right now, and it's set in the 60s, and it's from the point of view of the photographer from Black Mountain. There's a point in Black Mountain toward the end of the book where he goes and he interviews this guy that got famous or infamous by doing a sequence of photos of predatory animals. And I'm writing about that guy as a kid, as a 12-year-old in this story. So, you know, it doesn't matter. You don't have, it has nothing to do with Black Mountain, anything like that. It's just that the world is pretty lived in. I very seldom, or the universes, I should say. I really do go back to the characters and the settings, and I do think about how they affect each other. You don't always see that in the writing, because sometimes I like to deviate. I like to throw a wrinkle in and have the corners not line up. But it is a ripple effect. Things do, one story does affect another one, even if you don't notice it.
Children of the Fang, as I said, is now available in Kindle and print, Amazon, other places, on WordHorde's website.
Yeah, if you order through WordHorde, you'll get a little signed bookplate on which I do a little doodle and color in. I think Ross told me that we're just about like sold out of or gone through the bookplates. So I'm in the process of trying to wrap up the next sort of batch of them. So
I sure hope I get a signed one. Steven sent this to me, and I asked him to sign it to the best podcaster ever.
So he signed it to Brian Keene?
Yes, absolutely. It's blank. There's nothing in there. Like, nice. God damn it! I know I got a free book from Steven, and I really appreciate it. But where's my?
Though I feel like I should mention, because it's funny. Laird's the very nice things Laird said about me made me think that I have this story coming out in this what is it called? This weird World War III anthology, which is due out in early, I think it's like October 6th maybe. And it's about astronauts fighting cosmonauts and what do you call them? MeGo on a secret moon bases in the 1980s after World War III has happened. And
it sounds like to me that you're channeling Pete Rawlik on this one.
Well, the funny thing about it was just it's that I mean it is that kind of thing where you think, man, I don't know. This is just, it's kind of crazy. It's kind of fun, but it's nice in a way to hear Laird saying these things and think, oh, that's what I'm doing. Right. That's what I'm doing. Yes.
This isn't schlock.
Yeah. I mean, that's
what, John, you are profound, John. That's
one of the reasons why I wanted to do it that way. Like I said, it'd be easy to say, John, talk about your work, Laird, talk about your work, but to reverse it, especially you guys have, gone through this journey more or less together, even though you're obviously not the same writers, you don't have the same styles, but you're in the same field and you're friends. And
we're kind of spawned out now.
Yeah.
Where there's old Sam and the big holes are starting to appear in our carcasses, and we're feebly heading up the stream and kind of just bumping into the waterfall at this point.
So who's the bear then that's coming for us? It's Stephen Graham Jones, isn't it? He's the bear. Yeah, he's going to get us. Yeah, he's just like...
Not the bear, the deer.
So last thing I'll say is...
the elk. The carnivorous elk.
Last thing I'll say is
that's right.
Pick up Children of the Fang, please, and because you will be well rewarded. And pick up the Coleridge novels if you have not done that yet. Because, you know, selfishly, I want to see a fourth one. And,
Me too.
So
Me too. And once you read them, you will too.
Yeah, they will.
Thank you. Appreciate
it. John, Laird, thank you so much. I really love talking with you guys.
Likewise.
And thanks for being here, Rich. We'll have the audio version of this up in a week or so, and I'll email you guys. And
I like the fact that like we've sort of steadily lost, you know, what happened to Matt Carpenter.
Well, none of the ladies showed up.
You know,
none of the ladies showed up today.
But Rich, he survived the things.
Brother.
He survived the things that Laird and I sent after him.
That's right. Eco challenge right here. I did it.
Rich is the final girl. Yeah.
He's gonna disappear in the stinger. He'll be sitting there downloading some porn, whatever. Just boom,
he's gone.
Here comes the hook.
No, it'll be horror porn though.
Yeah, right. But
thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.